December 23, 1941. Hong Kong had fallen just 2 days before Christmas. I can still smell the acrid smoke of burning warehouses and hear the sharp crack of rifles echoing between shattered buildings. My baby clung to me with tiny fists, his breath shallow from hunger, while I tried to keep my head down as the British garrison surrendered to Japanese troops. But I was not a soldier. I was simply a wife, a mother, and suddenly a prisoner of war. My name is Keiko Sato. I was 24, born in Yokohama, but married to a clerk in Hong Kong. We had imagined our life would be ordinary. Letters from home, quiet evenings, perhaps a better future for our son. That illusion collapsed with the thunder of artillery. "I will keep him safe," I wrote in my hidden diary, though I had nothing to feed him except boiled water and scraps of rice husk. At first, I thought being a Japanese woman might protect me, but war had no mercy for nationality, not here. I was swept with hundreds of civilians into makeshift detention under the British, who feared collaborators. The irony was brutal. My husband worked for a trading company, not the military. Still, suspicion was enough. The camp they pushed us toward was once a missionary school. Its white walls were scorched black, windows blown out by shell fire. The smell of mold and sweat hit me before I stepped inside. Dozens of women huddled on the floor, their children crying, their faces gray with exhaustion. That first night, my son whimpered until dawn, and I whispered promises I could not keep. Days blurred together. Guards issued rations, a ladle of thin porridge, sometimes a crust of bread. I tried to stretch each mouthful, pretending I had eaten so my boy could swallow the last spoonful. Around us, rumors spread. Singapore was falling, Manila was under attack, and the Pacific was a firestorm. History was shifting outside the walls, but inside, time was measured by hunger and fever. One evening, I overheard 2 nurses whispering, "More ships are coming. Americans." Their words felt impossible. Until then, America had been an abstract name, a distant country my teachers had described as arrogant and rich. Now it was a force moving across the ocean, closer every day. In the camp, fear became currency. Each rumor was a spark in the darkness. Were the Japanese winning everywhere? Would the British abandon us? What would happen if the Americans came? My mind raced with questions, but my arms grew weaker from carrying my child. Then came the march. We were told we would be relocated inland. Relocated meant endless walking, with no shoes for many of us, under a sun that burned our skin raw. Babies cried until their voices failed. I carried my son pressed against my chest, his body frighteningly light. Once, when he would not stop coughing, a guard barked at me to silence him. I pressed his face into my shawl and prayed he would breathe again. I remember the sound of boots on gravel. British troops retreating, their rifles slung, their faces hollow. They avoided our eyes. The world I thought I knew was crumbling, and I stood in its ruins, a mother with nothing but a child too weak to lift his head. We were herded into trucks at last, packed so tightly I could not shift my weight. The engine roared, belching smoke into our lungs. My baby whimpered once and fell silent. Panic clawed my throat. Was he still breathing? I nudged his lips with my finger until I felt the faint warmth of air. Relief and terror tangled inside me. By the time the truck stopped, night had fallen. We were in a larger camp, barbed wire glistening under searchlights. The guards shouted in English and Cantonese, orders I barely understood. Wooden barracks stood in rows, each smelling of damp straw and waste. It was here that I learned the word I would carry like a brand, POW, prisoner of war. Inside the barracks, women whispered about rations, about sickness, about the Red Cross. One older woman told me, "Hold your baby close. The soldiers have their rules, but hunger has none." She was right. Food theft was constant. Some women fought like wild animals for a crust. Others sat in silence, waiting for death. My boy's ribs began to show beneath his skin. His cry was more like a kitten's mewl. I tried to mash boiled weeds into a paste, but he gagged and turned away. My milk had dried up weeks earlier. At night, I pressed his cheek to my chest, pretending so he might feel comfort even if there was nothing left to drink. And then, one morning, the sound changed. Instead of Japanese commands or British muttering, we heard the distant rumble of engines, deep and steady. Planes. The guards grew restless, scanning the sky. The ground trembled under heavy guns. Some whispered it was the Americans. Others, feared it was only more Japanese units arriving. That night, as flares lit the horizon, I clutched my son and thought, if tomorrow brings death, at least he will not be alone. But if it brings something else, freedom perhaps, could we even survive long enough to see it? I didn't know then that the Americans were closer than I believed. I didn't know that the men I had been taught to fear would one day hand my starving baby a bottle of milk. If you want to hear how a Japanese woman POW lived to see that impossible moment, subscribe now, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps me continue telling stories that history almost forgot. January 1942. The cold clung to us like a second skin as we were moved inland from the coastal camp. The trucks had broken down on rough roads, so the guards ordered us to walk. Each step ground dust into my cracked heels. I carried my son against my chest, his weight frighteningly light, his eyes too tired to cry. The line of prisoners stretched along the horizon, men, women, children, all reduced to shadows under a merciless sun. I had once been proud of my Japanese heritage. At school in Yokohama, our teachers spoke of honor and strength, of a nation destined to rise. But here, as a Japanese woman among foreign captives, I was no longer the daughter of an empire. I was simply a body in a crowd, holding on to a child whose survival felt less certain each day. If you live, you must remember, I wrote into my diary scraps, words smudged with sweat. Remember every face, every hunger, every kindness. Hunger hollowed us out faster than the march. We were given half a tin of watery rice once a day. The guards ate better, bread, dried fish, sometimes even canned meat. The smell drifted through the ranks and gnawed at our insides. Some prisoners cursed them under their breath. Others stared with blank, glassy eyes, too weak to hate. At night, we slept in barns or roadside ditches. My son's breathing rattled like paper torn slowly. Fever burned through his small body, and I tore strips from my only shawl to soak in muddy water and press against his skin. Around me, women prayed in whispers, in English, in Cantonese, in Tagalog. Different tongues, same desperation. By the third week, the column had shrunk. Those who could not walk were left behind. I never saw them again. Once I stumbled and nearly fell. A stranger, an Englishwoman, perhaps 30, slipped her arm under mine and hissed, "Up, quickly." Her name was Margaret. She had no child of her own, but she steadied me whenever my knees buckled. That night, she shared her crust of bread with my son, crumbling it into his mouth as if it were a feast. I never forgot that. We reached a larger camp near Canton, rows of bamboo huts surrounded by barbed wire. The sign read in English and Japanese, "Civilian Internment Center." It was meant to sound humane, but inside there was disease, lice, and water that stank of rust. Prisoners argued over sleeping space on the hard-packed earth. The guards barked orders we only half understood, striking with rifle butts when voices grew too loud. And yet, there were moments of strange humanity. One evening, as we lined up for rations, I saw a Japanese soldier slip an orange to a prisoner child. He did it quickly, as if ashamed. For that child, the fruit was a treasure. For me, it was proof that even uniforms could not erase all traces of compassion. News filtered in like smoke under a door. Singapore had fallen in February, Manila in January. The Japanese flag spread wider across the Pacific, and we thought it might cover the whole world. But then, whispers came. The Americans had struck back at Midway. Some said 4 Japanese carriers had been sunk. Others dismissed it as fantasy. I had no way of knowing what was true. What I did know was this: my son was slipping away. His body was too thin, his lips cracked and dry. He clung to me like a shadow, but even his cries had grown faint. I prayed, not to the emperor, not to the gods of my childhood, but to anyone who might listen, that he would live long enough to see a day when food was not a dream. Margaret told me once as we huddled in the barracks, "The Americans will come. They must." I asked her how she knew. She smiled weakly. Because wars always change, and no empire lasts forever. In August 1942, we heard the thunder of distant guns. Some guards vanished overnight, replaced by new ones with harder faces. The sky filled with the drone of aircraft. For the first time, Japanese troops looked nervous. Something was shifting. One night, I was jolted awake by searchlights stabbing the sky. Explosions rumbled far away, and the guards shouted orders none of us understood. The air smelled of cordite and smoke. My son whimpered, his thin arms clutching my neck. Around me, prisoners whispered the same word over and over. Americans. I couldn't imagine what an American looked like up close. At school, they had been painted as greedy giants, soft and spoiled. But in that moment, with the ground trembling and the guards frantic, I clung to the thought of anyone at all, who might end our suffering. Still, doubt gnawed at me. What if the Americans treated us no differently? What if they brought only more hunger, more fear? In war, mercy was rare. As dawn crept over the camp, smoke still smoldered on the horizon. The guards were tense, their eyes darting, their hands never far from their rifles. Something had changed in the air. The world beyond the barbed wire was moving closer, and with it came a question I could not yet answer. Were the Americans our salvation, or another kind of captor? The only certainty was this: the moment of reckoning was coming, and when it arrived, my son's life would hang in the balance. April 1945. The war had dragged us through 3.5 years of captivity. My hair had thinned, my skin was leathery from sun and hunger, and my son, my little Hiroshi, was barely taller than my waist, though he was almost 4 years old. His eyes were too large for his face, shining out from a body wasted by disease. He clung to me as though his small hands alone could anchor us to life. By then, whispers were thunder. The Japanese were losing. We had heard about the battles of Iwo Jima and Leyte Gulf from prisoners who traded information with guards. Even the guards themselves looked gaunt, their uniforms frayed, their voices sharp with fear. At night, the horizon glowed faintly from bombardments far away. Something was collapsing, and we were caught in the middle. The morning it happened began with silence. No guards barking, no trucks grinding, just silence, broken only by the coughs of the sick. We sensed it before we knew it. The enemy was at the gates. Then, distant rumbling, tanks. The ground itself seemed to shiver. My heart pounded so hard I thought the guards would hear it. Shots cracked in the distance, shouts in English, louder, closer. The guards vanished, some fleeing through gaps in the wire. Then came the sound we had only dreamed of. American voices calling through bullhorns, telling us not to fear. The gates were torn open, and into our world of filth and hunger stepped soldiers in helmets painted with white stars. I froze. For years, America had been the faceless adversary. Now, flesh and blood men stood before us. Their uniforms were clean compared to ours, but their faces were tired, streaked with dust. Some looked no older than boys. Their weapons gleamed with oil, but it was their eyes I noticed. Eyes that scanned us not as enemies, but as something else. Hiroshi clutched my skirt. He was too weak to stand without leaning against me. A soldier approached, tall, with a jaw darkened by stubble. He crouched down, his rifle slung, and studied my son. For a heartbeat, I thought he might strike us. Instead, he reached into his pack and pulled out something I had not seen in years, a tin can. He tapped it, smiled, and spoke words I barely understood. Milk. At first, I did not believe him. Milk was something from another life, a world of peace and kitchens and morning sunlight. But then, another soldier brought a small bottle, poured in white liquid, and handed it toward me. My hands trembled as I took it. Hiroshi blinked, unsure. I pressed the bottle to his lips. He sucked once, then again, and suddenly he was drinking, greedily, desperately, his throat working as if he might swallow the whole world. Tears blurred my vision. I had forgotten how it felt to cry with joy. Around me, other prisoners gasped, some sobbing openly as Americans handed out rations, cans of Spam, chocolate bars, hard biscuits. The air filled with smells so foreign and rich that I nearly fainted. One soldier handed me a chocolate square. I stared at it, uncertain if it was real. He laughed gently, broke it in half, and placed a piece in my hand. When I bit down, sweetness flooded my mouth. It was overwhelming. I had lived so long on bitterness, bitter weeds, bitter broth, bitter silence. This was something else entirely. I realized then that mercy could arrive from the unlikeliest hands. For years, propaganda had taught me Americans were monsters, decadent and cruel. Yet here they were, giving milk to a starving Japanese child. The irony cut deep. My own countrymen had left us to rot, while those I had been told to fear offered salvation. That night, the Americans set up medical tents. Hiroshi was examined by a doctor who shook his head gravely but smiled when the boy managed to stand. They gave him powdered milk, vitamins, even a toy carved from wood. I sat nearby, clutching the diary scraps I had carried all this time, and wondered how history would record this moment. Would anyone believe that an American soldier's kindness had saved my son's life? The camp itself became a flurry of activity. Trucks rolled in, distributing supplies. Prisoners emerged from huts like ghosts, blinking in the sudden flood of attention. Some collapsed in relief. Others could not stop staring at the soldiers as if afraid they might vanish. That night, I wrote by candle stub. Today, Hiroshi drank milk. Today, for the first time in years, he smiled. The world is stranger than I ever believed. But relief was tangled with fear. We did not yet know what the end of the war would bring. We heard rumors of bombings, of cities burning, of Japan on the brink. I wondered if returning home would mean shame, or if we even had a home to return to. Still, as I lay on the rough boards of the barracks, Hiroshi asleep beside me, his lips stained faintly white from milk, I felt something I had not allowed myself in years. Hope. Yet in the distance, beyond the barbed wire and the floodlights, the war was not over, and hope, fragile as it was, could be crushed in an instant. August 1945. The war that had begun with thunder ended in silence. We heard it first in whispers. Hiroshima destroyed by a single bomb, then Nagasaki. We could hardly grasp it. The guards were gone, the barbed wire cut, and yet fear lingered in our bones. What did surrender mean for us, Japanese prisoners held by those we had been taught to hate? The Americans told us plainly, the empire had fallen. Japan had accepted unconditional surrender on August 15th. The words struck me like a blow. My homeland, invincible, eternal, had bent its knee. For some prisoners it was cause for joy, the promise of return. For me, it was a knot of relief and shame tangled together. In the weeks after liberation, the camp transformed. U.S. Army medics worked tirelessly, treating diseases that had run rampant for years. Hiroshi received daily rations of milk, canned peaches, vitamins. His cheeks filled out. His laugh returned. Each time he smiled, I was torn between gratitude and grief. Gratitude to the strangers who had saved him. Grief that it had not been my own countrymen who kept him alive. The Americans treated us not as enemies, but as souls in need. They deloused our clothes, gave us soap, even permitted letters home. I wrote trembling words to my family in Yokohama, uncertain if they were alive. I am alive, I scrawled. Hiroshi is alive. We are alive because of those we were told were demons. Some of the women in camp could not reconcile it. They muttered that the milk, the chocolate, the smiles were tricks, masks hiding cruelty. But days passed, then weeks, and no cruelty came. Only steady hands, calm orders, food, medicine. I began to believe what my own eyes showed me. In September, we were placed on transport ships bound for Japan. As the shoreline of China faded, I held Hiroshi close, marveling at how strong his legs had become. The ship's deck was crowded with survivors, their faces turned toward a future they could not yet see. Soldiers handed out blankets, mugs of hot soup, and even candy for the children. Hiroshi clutched his piece of candy as if it were treasure. When we arrived in Yokohama, the city I had once called home was rubble. Bombing had reduced entire districts to ashes. My family house was gone, my parents missing. Only neighbors remained, hollow-eyed, telling me the dead could not be counted. I stood there with my son and realized that survival was both a gift and a burden. Life in post-war Japan was harsh, food was scarce, black markets flourished, and shame hung over us like smoke. Yet each time Hiroshi drank his cup of milk from American relief supplies, I remembered that moment in the camp, the soldier crouching, the bottle extended, the impossible mercy. Years later, when Hiroshi asked me how he survived, I told him the truth, not about the empire, not about glory or defeat. I told him about the day strangers in foreign uniforms gave him milk, about how kindness can appear where we least expect it, and how it can change the course of a life. I had entered captivity as a proud daughter of Japan, believing in stories of strength and destiny. I left captivity understanding something larger, that nations rise and fall, but human mercy, rare, fragile, and real, can cut through even the darkest war. And so, when I look back, the moment that burns brightest is not the sound of bombs, or the crack of rifles, or even the silence of surrender. It is the sight of my starving son drinking milk from a bottle held out by an American hand. That was the day I knew history was more complicated than any empire would admit. That was the day hope returned. If you've walked this journey with me, if Hiroshi's story moved you, please subscribe, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every voice keeps these memories alive, so they are never forgotten.